Let's not beat around in the bush here. You could lose weight eating Tim Tams, but we both know that it's not going to feel very good, and it's certainly not going to be very sustainable. And if we're thinking about weight loss as a goal, really the goal is not to be losing weight. The goal is to have lost and be maintaining the lost weight, so we don't have to go back and do it again and again and again and again like many of us have experienced in the past. So the goal is not about losing, the goal is to have lost and maintained, and this is where sustainability becomes a really important piece of the discussion. So let's talk about why the proportion of whole foods that make up your nutrition and what you eat on a day-to-day basis can have a really big impact. In fact, may be the secret sauce to a sustainable weight loss plan. If you don't know me, I'm Mandy. I'm a clinical nutritionist in the Body Reset program, and we've worked with thousands of clients at this point to drop weight and keep it off. We currently have hundreds of people doing exactly that, eating more, feeling better, and dropping weight in the process. And I think that a large part of that can be attributed back to the fact that a big part of what we talk about with nutrition is not just calories in, calories out, but let's talk about the quality of what we're eating, what is making up what is going into our mouth and fueling our body. So what I want to go through today is 3 components to that, identifying what actually constitutes a whole food and how does it differ from what we would call a refined or a highly processed food. What are the 3 big pitfalls when it comes to refined and processed foods and how they can contribute to and create issues when we're looking at, through the lens of weight loss? And then what are some ways that we can actually change this? And I want you to be able to take away some of these tools and actually action them today. So let's start with, what is a whole food? And very short answer here is any food that is as close to the form that it grew in as possible. When you go into the supermarket and you walk in, you typically walk into the fruit and vegetable section. Those foods don't require a barcode. They look like the way they grew them. They are predominantly your whole foods. You go around a bit further, often you'll go into the meat section. We know that those came from animals. We know that they don't require a barcode. We know a steak is a steak. We know a pork chop is a pork chop. That is a whole food. It is in the form that it grew in. Go around a little bit further and you get the dairy products, right? Sometimes there's been some processing there, perhaps fermentation for the yogurt or churning for the butter, but essentially they are the way we first got that food. So a really good little kind of lens to look through here is how close to its original form is the bulk of the food that you're eating. If your food in no way resembles the way that it grew, if it has an ingredients list of a whole bunch of different things, it kind of falls more into this processed food category. And it might surprise you to know that bread, crackers, cereals, a lot of these foods that we eat, or some people eat on a pretty regular basis, actually fall into what is called the ultra-processed food category. And ultra-processed food in the research is linked to a whole lot of the chronic health conditions that we have today, particularly the metabolic things like insulin resistance and high blood pressure and all those sorts of things. So whole foods really are a food that is close to the way that it grew as possible and has had minimal human intervention to get it to edible form. Okay, we cook it, those sorts of things. That's not so much of an issue, but essentially it is the way that it grew. The second thing is, let's look at what are the bigger pitfalls of these kind of more processed foods, because at the end of the day, for weight loss to occur, there needs to be a caloric deficit. So we could say that calories in, calorie out is all that matters. And as long as you eat in a deficit, you will achieve some weight loss, which is why I started this by saying you could absolutely achieve that by eating Tim Tams. You're going to feel pretty average. You're going to feel really, really starving, and you're not going to be able to maintain it, but you could effectively lose weight. So what are the pitfalls then with these highly processed food? Well, I'm going to go through 3 key ones here. There are actually a few that we could look at, but the first one is when it comes to labeling, there is discrepancy in what needs to be put on a food label and how it needs to be recorded. And so more often than not, food labels on things like your protein bars, your muesli bars, maybe even things like your high protein yogurts and these sorts of processed foods that have a food label that you might track, perhaps in something like a MyFitnessPal or something, the actual label compared to the actual caloric value of the food can be quite different. They reckon maybe up to about 20% different in some cases, under or over. So the issue here is that if you're eating a significant portion of your food coming from foods that have a label and you're getting the nutrition information off the packaging, it's likely that you've got quite a big variance in what you're actually intaking compared to what you think you might be actually intaking. Now, it may be under, but it also may be over, and in most cases, it's likely over. There is, big differences in what people track to what they actually consume anyway because of tracking errors and whatnot. When you bring processed food packaging labels into that mix, we have an even bigger issue. So the short answer there is, if you want to be more accurate with what sort of caloric intake you're actually getting, stick with the whole foods that don't need a label, that you weigh and you measure and you can track them more accurately. The second one of the pitfalls here is that it kind of comes into the name. Unprocessed foods or whole foods tend to come in the cellular structure in which they grow. For example, if we eat some rice, it's got the bran, it's the form of the rice. In order for us to get the energy out of that rice, we have to chew it, our enzymes have to work on it, we have to break the cell wall of the rice structure apart to get the energy out of it. It requires energy to get the energy. And because of the fiber and because of what's going on in that digestive process, there's a certain amount of energy in that grain of rice or 100 grams of rice which will be unavailable to us. If you take a refined food, for example, a food that is made out of a flour, so we could think crackers or bread or pizza or pasta or anything here, that food has already been broken down, milled, ground, refined. The energy that is contained within that food is instant access. You can get it into your body, you can digest it, and we very quickly absorb it into our bloodstream, elevating our blood glucose, elevating our body's energy levels, etc. So the thing here is that the amount of caloric value you get from a food could be significantly higher from a refined food than from a whole food, because your body has to do a lot more work for the whole foods to actually get that access to that energy. So if we kind of give a bit of an example here, 100 calories of white bread versus 100 calories of carrots could be quite different to what you actually absorb energy-wise. And this is why, again, if we make the bulk of our meals coming from these more whole foods where our body's going to work to get that energy out, we're going to be absorbing a whole lot less of it. And we get this slower, more sustained kind of energy release, which has a real benefit as well from a satiety perspective and from just being able to not have the blood sugar spikes and dips that we might get from a more processed food. The last one is a little bit more vague, but it is a disruption to our microbiome that can come from more whole foods. So microbiome research is very interesting. It's very much a developing field, and there's still a whole lot that is not known yet. But one thing that is kind of understood is that in people that have a tendency to be overweight or obese people, the microbiome is very different to someone who is leaner. Now, the thing is that in order to get to a place of putting on weight, there has to be some caloric excess. And if this has been coming from whole foods, it's going to have been coming from foods that don't necessarily have a whole lot of fiber and a whole lot of the nutrients that feed our good gut bacteria. And so we can get this swaying of our microbiome to a less beneficial profile. Likewise, the other way, if we are filling up our plate with a lot of vegetables and a lot of things that have good fiber content, and we're going to feeding the bacteria, which typically are seen more in a lean or a healthier individual. So it's not necessarily that one comes first, it's rather we know that this bacterial profile tends to show up more in people that are able to maintain their body weight easily and stay at what would be called, a healthy body fat percentage. So let's promote that by eating the food that feed the bacteria that are in that microbiome. So, when we're eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of the good fibers, a lot of the good nutrients and whatnot that can feed our gut microbiome have been removed. And so we're just not supplying the food there for that bacteria to flourish and grow particularly well at all. So how do we actually change this? And this is what we work on with our clients in the program, because it's very much a case of it doesn't have to be 100% you never touch a processed thing again. And depending on your starting point, there's going to be further to go along the spectrum to get to the point of eating more whole foods and less of the processed foods. So where do we start with it? What's going to make the biggest difference? The first one is, I think, actually having a look back over your week and doing a little bit of a nutrition audit. Because what I can tell you from having worked with a lot of people now is that initially when we set out on a change of nutrition or something like that, because we've got a goal to lose weight, we will eat quote unquote clean, more vegetables, more protein, these sorts of things. Over time, what tends to happen is we get this creep of the old convenience foods back in. And so if you're just starting, but even if you've been doing this for a little while, it can be really telling to actually go back through your food over the last week. And I'd say do it over the last week or the last couple of days without preempting yourself. Just pick a day and go backwards and work out what percentage of the food that you ate was truly in that whole food category, i.e. as close to the way it grew as possible with minimal human intervention. Because you might be surprised at just how often our processed or an ultra-processed food is creeping in there. It might be the toast under your eggs at breakfast time. It might be the wrap that you're having with your lunch. It might be the protein bar that you're having for your afternoon snack. It might be the pasta or, whatever you're adding into your dinners. So they can tend to creep in a little bit, and sometimes it's just a good idea to go back and actually have a little bit of a nutrition audit of what percentage of whole foods am I eating and where can I easily make a switch. For example, add some vegetables to your eggs for breakfast, add some more chicken and bump the protein up. Or with your lunch, remove the wrap, have more vegetables, have a bigger salad, or if you need some carbohydrates in there, put some rice or some potato or some kurma or something else. But swap out those things that potentially are there for convenience sake, and this is ultimately why a lot of the processed foods end up in our diet, because they're very convenient, they're quick to do, and that's why they tend to sneak back in again. But do a nutrition audit and just check, because you might be surprised at how many foods that are perhaps not as whole food as we might think have crept in there. The second one is, and I say this to everyone if you're looking to change the way you're eating, is start with your breakfast. This is often the meal that you have the most control over. A lot of people rush and skip breakfast altogether, but if you're putting in a breakfast, which I do recommend you should be doing, get a good high protein breakfast in there and focus on getting that as close to whole foods as possible. You can work on the other meals later, but let's really nail the breakfast first. If you want some help with that, I have 5 high protein breakfast options which we use with our clients all the time. I will link that below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, just click high protein breakfasts and we can get that sent out to you. But it's just going to be a starting point for you to actually be like, okay, I really want to work on the quality whole food percentage of my meals, and I'm going to start with breakfast because that's the meal that I have the most control over, and also that's kind of the anchor to what goes on for the rest of your day. When you start the day feeling great, you're more likely to continue doing the things that allow you to continue to feel good. So comment high protein breakfast below. We can get that sent out to you. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be linked below. The last one is eat a higher percentage of meals and less snacks. Snack foods tend to be the ones that are really the most difficult ones when it comes to processing. We can think of crackers, okay, protein bars, protein yogurts, bliss balls, these sorts of things that tend to end up, or if we're going less healthy, muffins, biscuits, cakes, chips, those sorts of things. These are higher processed foods. They're generally always a higher processed food. And so if we actually move towards meals rather than snacking, which is a great concept anyway, I really don't like the concept of snacking per se, we can manage that a little bit better, because when we think of a meal, we kind of think of more foods rather than snack or convenience options so much. So we're more likely to think of eating some vegetables, eating some meat or some eggs or something like that. So moving away from snacking and moving towards whole foods is not only going to help you have probably a much better spread overall of your protein and macros and whatnot, but you're going to kind of just get rid of a whole lot of those foods that tend to be the more processed foods, and perhaps the ones that are more likely to be incorrect on the labels. And I am picking on protein bars here because it is pretty well known that the labels of protein bars are not particularly accurate, because often they're low in sugar, they've got a lot of fibre added to hold them together, and that fibre is not necessarily counted into their caloric level of the thing. So and then the sweeteners and whatnot, there's a lot of variation there with your protein bars that might be quite misleading. So moving more towards whole meals. So the 3 there that I went through, do a nutrition audit and just check, because you might be quite surprised. Start with your breakfast, because it's the meal that often we have the most control over, and it anchors the rest of the day, and you can get the high protein breakfast ideas if you comment that below. And then eat meals, not snacks. Snacking is a problem in general because we don't feel full and satiated from it. We can keep going until we've eaten 1,000 calories and we don't even recognize it. So eat meals, not snacks, and you're automatically going to end up cutting out a bunch of the more processed foods that you might have had sneaking in there. So hopefully this was helpful. Why whole foods can be a magic ingredient, the secret sauce to sustainable weight loss, and how to bring that into your day a little bit more. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.